What's up, guys? Asian here again with another sort of theory crafting video, but this is kind of also doubling as sort of a kind of clear up misconceptions and sort of myth busting, if you want to call it that, type of video as well. This particular video is going to be taking a look at endgame players and whether or not we use macros. Most of you already know the answer to this. No, we don't use macros. They're just not usable in endgame trials. We just can't use them because there's mechanics we have to play that are based off of RNG. Obviously, there's invulnerability phases of certain fights, like for example, all the dragons in Sunspire have a phase where they're flying in the air, and at that point the fight changes because we have to deal with adds or some other phase comes in, and then we have to swap macros and all that sort of other sort of nonsense. So just basic common sense will tell people that no, we don't use macros at all. However, this thread is a little bit old at this point here, but this is the thread that sort of prompted me to make this video. So the original thread here was mostly about what makes up DPS, gear, CP, rotation, things like that. Now, the thing is, though, there are some people who believe that, I think it's on the second page where it first begins, that we use macros, and it started off with this forum player right here, Varrock. Now do keep in mind that forum names are not equivalent to player names here, so just because that's his forum name doesn't mean that's his username. But you know, well, some people caught one of those Uber YouTuber elites cheating in DPS mannequin with the block cast macro. Okay, not a big deal. Yes, some people do use macros. It's illegal. It's against the terms of service. But for the by and large, pretty much every single endgame player that I know, we don't use macros at all. But this continues. Naomi Hutt says, "Am I right to guess you're using macros to pull such high numbers? Just seems fishy to me." Moving on from there. Okay, so I'm just looking up macros right now. And of course, I'm just saying that we're not using macros. It's just a ton of practice of hours on dummies. I'm a content creator, so I have a little bit of an unfair advantage because I practice a lot more often than other people while I'm making builds and things like that. But a lot of people here are just saying, no, people use macros here. So this is what, Varrock says again, where mouse macros are come to be believable. In order to go from 5k to 20k, you must weave within a 10 millisecond accuracy. You must save every millisecond so the chain effect builds up to 20k. Furthermore, some skills cannot be easily weaved or barswap, so some guys block cancel even in PvE. All of this with a true machine precision that really makes people suspicious. Basically, I think that YouTubers, etc., don't use real macros, auto-key and similar, but do use mouse aids, and then they tell that they are not using anything. Unless you open your mouse setup software, you can't really know. It's even hard to know because some high-end mouses also have pre-programmed setups and LCD displays below the body. Listen up, this is all complete bullshit. Just saying it right now, it's all complete bullshit. If what he's calling mouse aids is remapping our keys, then yes, pretty much every single endgame player is guilty of remapping our keys, because why not? A lot of us have mouse buttons. Additional mouse buttons besides left click, right click. Most of us have a scroll wheel, and that's 3 inputs already. Scroll up, scroll down, scroll in. If you are lucky enough to have a mouse, which most mouses do, they do have a scroll wheel button now. Some of us have gone one step further and have 2 side buttons as well, back and back and forward on web pages, and you can remap those. They're usually inputted as mouse button 3 and mouse button 4, sometimes mouse button 5 even on the PC. So yes, those are mouse aids, so to speak. Yes, we're able to remap our block cast, or I should say, we're able to remap our interrupt to a different key. Does that make a much of a difference? No, it doesn't. Every single endgame player that does this will do it, just because it just makes the rotation a lot more fluid, a lot easier to do, rather than having to right click and left click at the same time for our bash and things like that. So those aren't even considered macros at all. So a lot of this stuff, and you guys can go down the thread. I have a link in the comment section, the description below. But all this thread is basically just, no, endgame players are just using macros. They're cheating. It's very obvious that they're using these macros to get such high DPS on the W's. There's no other way. There's no other explanation. And of course, I'm just saying, we don't use aids. We don't use macros. We don't cheat. Otherwise, we would all have been banned by now at this point. We've just practiced for, again, hours on a dummy in order to perfect our rotation. And so rotation is just like any other skill. You can practice and you can get good at it. Now, of course, some people are going to be more talented than others. Not everybody makes it up to a Broadway musician. That's just the nature of, these skills. There's people who have the expertise and there are people who don't. But everybody can get to a certain point just by practicing. And yes, there are people with physical disabilities, arthritis, a carpal tunnel, etc., where certain rotations aren't going to be very feasible for them because they're physically unable to do that. And that's a completely different story, and of course I sympathize with those people. So, that this is obviously not directed towards people like that, but for everybody else who basically is just saying, hey, you guys are using macros, you guys are cheating. No, this video is here to disprove that. Now, one of the things that people have been asking for, particularly Naomi Hutt, as well as Makoto Hutt, these two are apparently a married couple, they're basically asking for me to have footage of doing a rotation. Motoko Hutt in particular says that they want to have a hands PC screen, an A, and all showing off what programs you have up, ideally with a regular 5-pound keyboard and mouse, playing a game showing you're able to pull the numbers proposed. Numbers proposed being obviously the numbers that we pull on our build videos, 80k, 85k, upwards of 90k if you're playing a stamina necromancer, etc., etc. And so, he goes on again, bargain bin keyboard and mouse with no add-ons, camera showing yourself, hands, screens, and all programs shut down in the background, pulling 50k DPS on a 3 million dummy. Now, currently in this patch, it is possible to get 50k. I personally can't do it. Somebody like RNC or Lico might be able to do it on a 3 million dummy, but I know I personally can't because I'm not the best DPS. But I will happily oblige. So we're going to transition over now to what Motoko Hutt and her spouse, has requested for. What's up, guys? Here we go. This is exactly what the forum warriors have been asking for. A video of the screen, which you can see over there. Keyboard over here. You can just barely see my fingers here. If I scoot down a little bit here, you'll be able to see my fingers here as they hit the buttons as I'm doing my skills. And you have the mouse way over here. You can just barely see it in frame here. Sorry about the differences in sound quality here. I am recording this on a DSLR. It's the only camera I have that was able to capture everything on frame here. So we're using the internal mic on the DSLR, so that's why it's a little bit echoey here. I am in an apartment, and as you can see, the walls are kind of open here where I'm at. There's really no sort of sound dampening here. But this is basically all of the demands that they have made on the forums here. I am obviously going to flex a little bit on them here. So just quickly going through all of them here. So the first one they want to know is, am I running any background software? So if we just go ahead and open up Task Manager here, and just take a look at what we have active. Nothing here stands out as macro software, nothing over here. I do have Corsair Utility Engine or my Corsair keyboard, but that is just for the lighting itself. I can even just end the task, and it's not a big deal. It's not going to impact my performance at all because the keyboard itself does not rely on the software to actually work. And then I am running a Logitech mouse here, but again, the only thing Logitech has here is a surround sound service, which obviously doesn't have anything to do with the actual mouse usage. So no Logitech gaming software, nothing like that is open, even in the background itself. So as you can see here, no real software running any sort of macros in the background, nothing at all. The other thing is add-ons. So I will be using add-ons, and the reason for that is because everybody on PC is able to access these add-ons. It's not like add-ons are, only specific to raid groups. Yes, there are definitely some add-ons that certain raid groups have programmed, and they are in-house programmed. But for the most part, all the add-ons that you see being used in raids can be downloaded specifically by anybody. So if we go ahead and focus in here, there we go. So here's a list of the add-ons. So if you are interested in knowing what each of these add-ons does, you can just pause the video and just go to ESO UI and just take a look at all these various different add-ons here. None of them use macros, none of them have access to cheat engines, nothing like that. So again, like I mentioned in the earlier section of the video, there's really no logical reason to expect endgame players to use macros. combination of mechanics, the combination of that sort of randomness in trials, and having to deal with everything that happens in trials, just lends it unfeasible to actually use any sort of macros, because you can have to adapt to the situation at hand, and macros are obviously not that great at adapting. You could, of course, write several macros and then swap between them as needed, but the various inputs that you would need to take in consideration doesn't make it feasible to really use a macro to kind of automate your DPSing. Even something like a auto what's it called, an auto clicker to click your mouse every second or so that way you get the light attack going. Even that's not really going to be useful, because what if you need to resurrect somebody? You have a challenge ability, things like that, like challenge acceleration or J-beam if you're a magic Templar, just wouldn't work. So again, add-ons as a software aside, there's no logical reason to expect endgame players to use any sort of macros or cheats at all. Going back here to the mouse and keyboard here. So I am using a Corsair mechanical keyboard. I know the demand was for a budget keyboard, but I'm not going to go out and spend $10, $15, $20 on something I'm only going to use once, and then I can't return. So this is just a typical standard mechanical keyboard, Cherry MX Red switches. Keyboards type doesn't matter. And I'll say that again, keyboard type doesn't matter when it comes to kind of figuring out how good you are as a player, because all that matters is that as long as your keys are able to push down and register with the computer, that's all that really matters. Regardless if you're using a rubber dome keyboard, a chiclet keyboard, for those of you guys who play on laptop for whatever reason, or you have mechanical switches. There are multiple types of mechanical switches. Doesn't really matter as long as your keys aren't sticking and as long as they register appropriately. So you can play on a $5 keyboard, you can play on a $200 mechanical keyboard. It's not going to affect your gaming performance at all. The mechanical switches are more for people who want to type rather than actually game. Yes, Corsair is primarily known as a gaming company, but Cherry MX switches, the blues, the browns, and all the other switches, they're more for people who want a good typing experience, not for people who want some advantage in MMOs or anything like that. And same thing with mouse. Mice themselves aren't particularly advantageous for most things. Obviously, this mouse is not your typical, $10 budget mouse. It is a G602 Logitech, so I do have side buttons here that I can reprogram however I'd like, as well as a scroll wheel and mouse button and various DPI settings here. The sensor here, I believe, is an optical sensor. But a lot of this stuff is more for MMOs and MOBAs, not really for something like ESO. Sure, I could remap all my abilities on the sidebars here. I don't do so because it's a little bit tricky in the way I hold my mouse. It makes it a little bit difficult for me to hit some of the buttons here reliably. But all you really need for a mouse and to be successful is really just to have a scroll wheel. Or even just two side buttons here. So this is a 602. This was probably around $50, $60 on sale. But I also have a cheaper mouse here, also from Corsair. It also has two side buttons. Focus here. Nope. Focus. Nope. Focus. There you go. So you have two side buttons here and another scroll wheel that you can actually depress for a third mouse click. So again, a lot of mouse these days. This is a pretty standard, this is a wired Corsair mouse, which is probably cost only maybe $15, $10 maybe on sale. So pretty cheap. And again, you still have those two remappable backwards and forward buttons. And you have your scroll wheel, which gives you three different inputs: scroll up, scroll down, and the actual in-click. So you don't need any sort of expensive mouse. All you need is just one mouse that's able to include at the very least two different inputs. Normally you're going to want to have a separate mouse button for barswap, one for bash, and ideally one for synergies as well. So whenever I am bash weaving, I usually will remap bash to a mouse button here on my side here, just so I can get some. It's a little bit easier to weave that way, but it's by no means necessary. All you really need is just one button for barswap and maybe one for synergies if you don't want to use the X key on your keyboard to activate synergies. Some people don't like to do that because you have to move your fingers down. So some people like to remap synergies to like the center mouse click button or something like that. But that's everything. The last thing that they asked for was a 3 million dummy parse, which doesn't make much sense because you're able to do a 3 million dummy parse in the span of a minute. So I'll do a 3 million dummy parse, but I can tell you right now, it's not going to tell you anything at all about my DPS because it's so short. Execute is so short. It doesn't tell you anything. There's no time for me to do an actual rotation or anything like that. So for 3 million, I will need a source of major fracture, so I'm going to use piercing mark here. So yeah, here I'll do a 3 million parse just so they say you know, I actually did it. If you guys haven't noticed, I am on my Stamina Nightblade. Just realized I'm not even activating my shade. It's probably gonna bite me in the butt. Yeah, that kind of bit me in the butt a little bit here. But the parse that I did there, zoom in a little bit so you guys can see the actual numbers here. Whoop. Parse over there on the 3 million was about 45k. I didn't use my shade. I can probably get another like 1k or so if I have activated my shade. So I'm not a good enough player to get 50k on a 3 million dummy. But you'll notice that the time in combat was 1 minute and 8 seconds, and I only did 8 killers of blades there. So not really representative of like your rotation mastery, not representative of sustain, not representative of anything. So 3 million dummies are a relic of the past. Nobody uses these anymore except to maybe brag about their burst DPS. No, what we're going to do is we're going to do a 21 million dummy instead. That is way more representative of actual DPS, of actual sustain, and so on. So we'll do a 21 million dummy parse. This is my Stamina Nightblade build, so this is pretty much a carbon copy of the Stamina Nightblade build that I have on my channel right now. The only thing I'm swapping out is I'm putting Leeching Strike in the back bar here. But other than that, everything else is pretty much exactly the same. So again, you'll be able to see my fingers here move with the different skill abilities. You can see my mouse over here, and you might be able to see, I'm not sure, it's a bit far away, but you should be able to see my fingers move for the light attacks, and so on and so forth. So here's the presentation that you all asked for, or not all of you, but the naysayers have asked for. Looking at rotation, just to show you guys that we don't use macros at all. This time I will not forget to use my shade. I fully expect some forum players to complain about this when I post this on the forums or even on YouTube, that, you know, I didn't do X, I didn't do Y. If all you're going to do is really complain about my testing methodology, then honestly, go bother somebody else, because this is exactly what you guys asked for, with the exception of obviously the add-ons, but I've already explained why the add-on argument doesn't make much sense. I mean, the only players who would be able to argue against add-ons would be console players, because they don't have access to add-ons. But if I were to use a gamepad, that wouldn't really be a fair comparison, because I'm not a console player. I don't use gamepad mode on PC. So my DPS would be absolute garbage. And that's not really an accurate representation at all of my actual true DPS potential. So people who are saying, well, why don't you try, you know, being a console player and use gamepad? Well, no, that's not really a fair comparison. That's like, you know, telling a cross-country runner to run without his shoes on. You know, that's just, you know, you're giving that cross-country runner an unfair disadvantage there. handicap, you would say. And it's kind of the same idea with add-ons here. Everybody's able to use add-ons, and you're asking me to not use add-ons. Then it's like saying, okay, everybody can take an open book test, but Charlie over there, you're not allowed to use the book at all, you know, because you're smarter than everybody else. Like, that doesn't make much sense. You know, the idea is, you know, if the playing field is fair for everybody, then it should be fair for everybody. Not just, you know, you can't just give somebody a handicap because you think they're better than you. That's not really how it works. I totally could have been kept before I did that last bow. So people who are asking, we're probably going to ask, you know, well, if you're not macroing, how come your DPS is so high? My DPS is actually not that high. If you compare this parse to like a more experienced Stamina Nightblade parse, I'm actually pretty bad at Stamina Nightblade. Like, I'm not terrible, but I'm also not the best Stamina Nightblade either. So my parse might seem high to you, but in actuality I'm probably only hitting maybe 90 to 85% of what the maximum parse theoretically should be. I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to break 80. Should be able to. There we go, just managed to break 80 there. So, yeah, there you go. That's the parse there. I think my parse on the actual build video is a little bit higher. Let's zoom in on that there. There you go. About an 80k parse or so, just over 80k. So, yeah, you can see here, no macros, just a lot of practice. So those guys who continue to accuse endgame PvE players of using macros, please stop doing that. It's an insult to the amount of work and effort that we do to actually learn our rotations. And you can learn this. Everybody can learn their rotation. Everybody can learn to do this amount of DPS. Obviously, people with physical disabilities like arthritis and carpal tunnel, you guys obviously won't be able to do this because of, you know, physical disability. And so for that, for those people, you know, I'm not expecting you guys to be able to do a full light attack rotation. That's just unreasonable and unfair for me to ask somebody to do that. But for those guys who don't have physical disabilities, you're easily capable of matching or even exceeding this DPS with practice. I took hours of practice. A bit unfair because I'm a content creator, but I took hours of practice to learn how to do all of this. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. It's just a matter of actually going through the effort to sit down in front of a target dummy and practice your rotation until you can learn how to do it. So please stop saying we use macros. It's an insult, and quite frankly, it speaks volumes about your own laziness and incompetence than our achievements here. So again, that sounds harsh, but that's the truth of it. Everybody who doesn't have a physical disability is able to learn a rotation and pull this amount of DPS. It's a matter of whether you want to put the effort and whether you want to put the time into learning it. But that concludes this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.